So it's got wizards and knights, although they're both the same thing. It's rescuing a princess from a castle, so that's definitely Arthurian.
Yep.
It's just that the Luke doesn't. I don't know. I guess Luke is like half Arthur-ish.
Let me put it this way.
All right.
When you read Thomas Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's, in the English language, that is sort of where all of our further English language iterations of the Arthur story usually springs from, unless you're doing like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But for the most part, we are working with that text. There were other things. There were other ballads. You know, there are other stories, even in English, going as far back as Lachmann's Brut from the 13th century, and you have Chaucer's The Wife of Bath's Tale, and you know there are other English language versions. But when you think about Arthur in English, we go back to Thomas Mallory, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing about Thomas Mallory's book is it is an accretion of almost 1,000 years of Arthurian stories through a very complicated process. Its origins, ancient Welsh poetry, Irish mythology, Norman propaganda, frankly, pseudo-histories, Geoffrey of Monmouth is in there, French romances, and, no small amount of biblical texts, whether you're talking about coming off of Geoffrey, the conception of Arthur is right out of the Bible and the story of David and Bathsheba. In its own way. I mean, I have a whole theory about that. But there's also the Apocrypha, like the Gospel of Nicodemus, is part of where we get the origins of the Grail story, right? The Grail story itself comes out of the Gospels, right?
Wait, how so?
It's the cup of the Last Supper.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you remember that thing that happens in the Gospels where Jesus has a Last Supper?
Yeah.
Right. Do you remember what the Holy Grail is?
I think I always forget.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
No, that's really interesting because some of the texts forget. Like there is one in German called The Crown. The Holy Grail, I think, is just like a box. There's I'm gonna say, I think it's in Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parzival. I think it's a stone, like an emerald or something. Like they also would keep forgetting. You know, Chrétien says it's a wide dish, a grau. The idea of it as a cup, I mean, that actually comes a little bit later. But that's sort of my point. By the time you get to Thomas Mallory, you have a whole bunch of different sources for the story that, when he writes it down, is presented as a unified whole. In a sense, I mean, it's divided up into chapters, whatever, and then you can get into like the differences between the Winchester manuscript and Caxton's printing and all. But the point being, what you have with Mallory is a distillation of hundreds of texts and hundreds of years, right?
It'd be funny at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was Indiana Jones drinks out of a cup and the knight says, "Oh, by the way, they were all the Grail. He was just a bad dude."
That'd actually be great. I'm glad you brought up Indiana Jones because, I mean, again, you know, it is tied to Star Wars insofar as they're both, you know, out of the mind of George Lucas. You know, Harrison Ford's in both.
Yep.
It's not like Lucas wasn't aware of Arthurian stories. He very much was.
Yeah.
So, what is Star Wars?
It is, what's the Man in the Myth or whatever that
The Hero of a Thousand Faces?
Yeah, that. It's that.
The Man in the Myth.
I don't know.
Joseph Campbell, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so, but it's not just that. I mean, think about it. It's, you know, yes, you have like the Hero of a Thousand Faces and the whole Campbell and the hero's journey and all of that stuff, and that is obviously in there. And how much Lucas was conscious of that at the time, and how much that was him kind of like, you know, backwards looking and going, oh yeah, that's what I was doing.
George Miller did the same thing. Like,
oh really?
Oh, Mad Max. Yeah, I guess that's what I was doing.
Now here's the thing. You know, I think in both cases they didn't read that book, but I think there is a truth in that they were unconsciously building off of a kind of story cycle that is out there, right? And that Campbell was identifying. You know, I don't think them looking back at their own work and saying, yeah, I guess this is what I was doing, that's not illegitimate, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think the idea is that this is something almost unconscious in like storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But here's the thing. Star Wars as a film, though, right? It is a bunch of different texts shoved together, right?
Yeah.
The obvious influences are Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what are the elements of The Hidden Fortress?
Two bumbling goofballs narrating. There's a princess
Yeah.
and a general, I think.
Basically, two slaves
Yeah.
who are on the run from an army. They try to escape, and they come across a general and a woman, and they have to help this woman who they find out is a princess.
Yeah.
That is, R2-D2 and C-3PO and Princess Leia and, more or less Obi-Wan Kenobi,
Yeah.
right? At least in the earliest iteration of when Lucas was writing it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's right there. I mean, and if you watch The Hidden Fortress, you will see that Lucas uses all those side wipes that Kurosawa was doing, and they're very obvious homages, right?
Yeah.
But what else do you have in there? I mean, you have Dune, right?
Dune, definitely.
Dune is really in there. Desert Planet.
Flash Gordon.
Oh no! Let me unpack
Okay.
Dune though for a
Okay,
second,
yeah,
because you have Desert Planet, right?
Yeah.
And you got the sandworms.
Yeah.
But you know
Spice.
they
mentioned
reference
spice.
they what is Han Solo but a spice smuggler?
Yeah.
Right. But also, what is Dune? Dune is, this guy who is not necessarily from that desert planet, right? He's an outsider.
Yeah.
Helps foment a rebellion,
Mm-hmm.
right, against the Empire.
Yeah.
That's just Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally just Star Wars, right? Okay. So you got Dune. But what's Dune? Dune is just Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah.
Not only the story of Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence and, the Arab uprisings against the Ottoman Empire during the First World War, but the film Lawrence of Arabia by David Lean, which, stunning cinematography and, Peter O'Toole is like insanely charismatic in that. But who else is in that movie? But
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Well, Alec Guinness and brownface.
Yeah. Again.
Yeah. Are Arabs white? I don't, that's why whiteness is like a false consciousness thing, obviously. But yeah, at the same time, having a British guy playing, an Arab prince is not a great idea. It just isn't. But okay, so you have Lawrence of Arabia is right there. I mean, look at all the stuff set on Tatooine, right? Especially like that wonderful shot when Luke is looking out across his desert homeland and the two suns, and Lucas is going for that sort of David Lean feel, that epic majesty of the desert, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's in there, right? But then, as you said, Flash Gordon. Oh, this thing is nothing but Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and all of that kind of space stuff of the 1930s. Originally, it was like comic strips, I think, and then became like movie serials and TV shows, that kind of early sci-fi, adventures in space, right? So that's where you get all of like the spaceships and the lasers and all of that type of stuff. And like that has its origins in Edgar Rice Burroughs, his Barsoom series, the John Carter of Mars and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so that's all in there, Flash Gordon, John Carter, all that type of stuff.
The Dam Busters.
The Dam Busters, that's right. World War II movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's totally in here. All those dogfights, right? All those dogfights. The end of this film is not just, something like the Dam Busters and I guess 30 Seconds Over Tokyo might be another one, right? Yeah,
but the Dam Busters in particular, because they actually took that dialogue and it practically like 0 Hour an Airplane.
Yeah.
they pretty much the entire last fight with the trench and everything is they kind of took the timing and everything from this one British war movie that was huge in England, and here we didn't know anything about it, but it was about, I guess it was some kind of planes coming down at this dam, and they had to like skip this bomb into the dam, and like so there's 3 different waves, and of course the first two fail and are chased by Darth Vader or something, but it's
Nazis, I assume.
Yeah, there's a dog fight just like this, so yeah.
And then the end of the film, when they get the medals, it's Triumph of the Will.
Yeah,
I guess it's actually Olympia. I forget which one, but it's Leni Riefenstahl.
Yeah,
it sucks that she had a really good eye, cause bad person, but really good, eye for placing the camera.
Advertising, man.
Yeah. So Star Wars, much like the Arthurian story, is, just a whole bunch of different elements put together into a coherent whole, right?
Yeah.
And one of those influences, though, is the Arthur story. What is the story of Luke Skywalker originally? Right? Not originally. I don't mean like, Luke Starkiller or whatever, but Luke Skywalker, he is a boy growing up in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
An orphan. He's not expected to become anything great. He's probably just going to have to become a farmer like his uncle, Owen. And instead he meets the local weirdo, the space wizard, who he knows about, right?
Yeah.
Like, he knows who he is, but he's often told, like, don't hang out with that dude. He's weird.
Yeah.
And when he goes...
Doc Brown.
Yes. Dennis, it is. No, yes. Doc Brown is another iteration of Merlin.
Yeah.
Right? The relationship between Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi is Arthur and Merlin. Mm-hmm. And we see that relationship in other places, whether you're talking about Gandalf and Aragorn or Gandalf and Frodo, or pretty much Gandalf and anybody. Gandalf is just, Merlin, right?
Yeah. I will say, you had asked me when did I, realize Obi-Wan Kenobi was a different version of Merlin. And I don't know if I'd put that together, but I definitely put Gandalf. Like, once I heard about Gandalf, I'm like, oh, this is just the same thing. It didn't really occur to me until this watching was when they're in the trash compactor and Luke gets pulled down by that creature. I was like, oh, that's the Watcher in the Water from the Mines of Moria in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Oh, I think Lord of the Rings is in here.
Yeah, definitely. And it was huge in the early 70s. Obviously Led Zeppelin, but
well,
but everybody was trying to make it. And,
I was gonna say we've talked before. Like, the Beatles wanted to do it, John Borman wanted to do it and didn't get to do it. Who actually did it? Ralph Bakshi.
Bakshi,
yeah. No, I mean, it's not like Lord of the Rings was big enough, and Lucas has his own interest in all of these mythologies and stuff. There's no way he didn't read Lord of the Rings at some point. When Luke is hanging out with Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan is like, I knew your father. I've got his sword.
Oh, do I have to pull out a stone? No, I got it right here.
he does make it easier on Luke. But what is that but the story of Arthur and Merlin and Excalibur?